To prayer and meditation, seeking to find your face. I'm totally waiting for man's opinion, dealing with their dominion. Good evening, folks. It's Pastor Robert Johnson. Thank you. Thank you for tuning in this evening. Thank you. Thank you, those that are already on. We're going to take a few minutes and give you a chance to tag some folks, start some watch parties, invite some other folks to be on with you. We have an amazing conversation that's about to take place with one of the outstanding, fine, brilliant young pastors in this country that I'm also so proud and honored to call him friend. I've known him for a very long time. I'm a native Mississippian. He's a native Texan, but I met him as he was coming through, and so we encountered each other in the great state of Texas. But he has gone on to do amazing things at Impact Church in Atlanta, Georgia. He is the founding pastor of Impact Church in Atlanta, Georgia, and it is a phenomenal story. And we're going to have him tell the story of Impact Church, tell you a little of his story, and have a wonderful time. We're also going to do some other things. We're going to, of course, our theme right now is focusing on Jesus and representing him for our contemporary challenge, in the midst of our contemporary challenges. And part of, you all know that part of what I'm trying to do right now is trying to free Jesus from some white supremacist interpretations of him and represent him as he really is in Scripture, as he's really given to us in Scripture. We've watered him down, we've Americanized him, we've made Jesus into all kinds of caricatures that he is not. And so we're representing Jesus so that you can experience the true liberator of both your circumstances and your soul. That's who he is. And so we're excited about that. But we're also going to talk about how Jesus relates to the issues of racial unrest and racial divide in our country. We're going to talk about the experience of living through a global pandemic and being quarantined. We're going to talk about how church leaders, so if you know of church leaders, St. Mark, others from other churches, invite your leaders to come on and hear this conversation, because we're going to ask Pastor Olu Brown to give us some counsel and words of wisdom about how to lead in a local church in the midst of a global pandemic and in the midst of multiple, almost like a perfect storm of global crises that are going on right now, and how Impact Church is handling that, and how you also can lead through the crisis. And then we'll talk about what my most exciting topic tonight is. We're going to ask him about reaching millennials and the next generations, because that is on the heart and mind of St. Mark. It's on the heart and mind of so many churches. So few churches do that well, but Impact Church does it well. And so we're going to talk to him and plug his heart and mind about reaching the next generation. You also hear from some other folks a little here tonight. I have some other guests that I've invited to be on. Quante Robinson is a member of St. Mark, part of our praise team, and he and I are in dialogue now about trying to launch a new ministry for millennials. And so we're visioning about that, and I wanted him to be on this conversation, so you may get a chance to hear from Quante, or at least get a chance to see him interact with Pastor Olu Brown. And then we have, of course, our outstanding associate pastor of St. Mark, Pastor Yolanda Oliver, who's on with us tonight. So glad she's here. And we always want to give kudos to our media leader, Nichelle Williams, who makes all this possible from the moment COVID-19 hit. Nichelle stepped into her role, and we've been online doing ministry and available to our congregation and available to people beyond our congregation almost every night of the week. And that's because of her excellence, her passion for outstanding ministry, And so she's been outstanding. So welcome, welcome, welcome again. Make sure you tag some folks, reach out to some folks. Those of you that are members of St. Mark, start a watch party, invite folks to come on with you. And again, we have on with us tonight Pastor Olu Brown of Impact Church in Atlanta. Olu, welcome to our broadcast, sir. Welcome to Ignite on this September 2nd, 2020 date. How are you, sir?
I'm doing great. Of course, it's always a great opportunity to see you and to be here with you. Can you hear me okay? All right. Well, doing great. And it's always a pleasure to be with you and to share in your wonderful time tonight, and also to meet your audience.
So as he's experiencing technical difficulties, just tell us a little bit about yourself, Dr. Brown, and how you and Pastor Johnson actually came to pass.
Yeah, well, Pastor Olu, great to be with you. We first met in Texas when he was serving there at Windsor Village. And of course, there are people who are listening outside of the United Methodist Church, but in the United Methodist Church, there's an ordination process that we go through, and they assign you a mentor and somebody to help guide you through it. And so Pastor Johnson was that person for me. And those who have been through it know it can be critical to have the right person, and not having the right person can be detrimental. And so that has been some years ago, but I've never forgotten his friendship, never forgotten all that he did to help me get through. And I've always been grateful. So I came to Atlanta after undergrad at a school in Hawkins, Texas, called Jarvis Christian College, and came here to go to seminary. And that was in 1999, and have been here ever since. So now a little bit more than 20 years later.
Tell us, sir, about your faith journey and a little about that, and then your call to ministry. Because I know we've got a lot of folks watching who, some of whom may know the Impact story, and so they want to know, man, I want to be like Olu Brown. I want to have a story. So tell them, they know the glory, but they don't know the whole story. But tell us the story of Olu Brown, and then tell us the story of Impact Church, how this amazing phenomenon happened.
Well, to kind of package parts of my story, beginning in small town America, in this town called Lufkin, Texas, my mother and two other siblings. And it was a great experience for me to grow up in Lufkin, Texas, because we were introduced to the local church pretty early on, two different Baptist churches. Our father at that time lived in Newark, New Jersey, and he was a pastor of a Presbyterian church. So 9 months out of the year, we were Baptists in small town America. And 3 months out of the year, we were, minutes away from the big city of New York City, and seeing that experience. And then when we were teenagers, he moved to Los Angeles, California, to pastor a church there. And so growing up, we had great experience with different parts of the country. We also had great experiences with the ecumenical body of the local church. And then went to a church affiliated school, Jarvis Christian College, which is part of the Disciples of Christ denomination. And that was a great opportunity to develop leadership and all of those kind of things. But something significant happened to me when I was a teenager, and that was a new church was planted in that small town of Lufkin by a gentleman named Lawrence Young. And that church was Abundant Life. And so as a teenager in that local church, I accepted my call to ministry. And Reverend Young is still in my life to this very day, and has guided me through so many stages of ministry. So fast forward, coming here to Atlanta, had a great opportunity to work at a local church called Cascade United Methodist Church, and under Walter Kimbrough, who mentored me and gave me a tremendous opportunity to build and develop ministry. And so in 2006, really felt led to plant a new church, and the bishop at the time appointed, and with 25 leaders and the support and well wishes of a lot of people, we started Impact Church in January of 2007. And now 13 years later, it is, more than what we ever dreamed it could be. And of course, like you said, it's been ups and downs, but very grateful for the journey. And I've learned a lot, and so thankful for all of those people along the way and to this very day who helped make Impact what it is. So it's bigger than me. It's bigger than any one of us. It's really a community of people. And our tagline is doing church differently.
As a matter of fact, Michelle, put that up as a banner. Impact Church, doing things or doing church differently.
Doing church differently.
Doing church differently. Put that up because that is a powerful. I think that that slogan, that tagline for Impact Church, really has to become something that all churches now that we own, that we have to envision church in a different way, and we'll talk more with him about that later. He's such an humble guy, and such a deferring guy. Olu is a team builder. He is an empowerer of others. He is not, that church has not been built around him trying to make a name for himself. It is about empowering all those young adults. So if you go to that church, if you go on any day of the week and you walk in the building, you will see just so many empowered young adults who are flowing in their gifts, who are doing vital ministry, and they know it. And Olu is can sometimes almost be invisible unless you know who he is. And so he's such an humble person. So he's not going to tell you, but Olu, I'm going to ask him to share with you. So how many folks before COVID hit, how many were you all seeing on Sundays, on all your Sunday services?
Yeah, and we actually call them experiences, in part because we believe we're inviting people into an experience with God. And so we go out to serve. And so we call them worship experiences. So we have 3 pre-COVID-19, 8, 10, and 12 here in Metro Atlanta. We're just a few minutes from the Atlanta airport. And so in person, on average, about 2,000 people a weekend, and then roughly another 2,000 people who watched online. And so now during COVID, that number, of course, is adjusted. And so every Sunday, on average, about 4,000 people who watch via online. And so we still have our live stream at 8, 10, and 12. And this Sunday is very unique. Like some other churches across the country, we're actually starting drive-in worship. And so in our 10 and our 12 experiences, people register and they drive in, find their parking space, and via the radio and speakers outside, they'll be able to watch. So as of right now, the registration is full for both of those experiences. And so we're thinking about adding a third experience to that.
Oh, well, Olu, share with our listeners, when did you know in the Impact journey, when did you know that it truly was something both special but also sustainable, that it was going to be a sustained phenomenon? When did you like, this is different?
Well, to be honest with you, there's every year where something happens when I'm not sure if we're going to make it. One of my mentors said, Olu, you have a scarcity mentality. And that was in part growing up in a family, watching my mom as a public school teacher getting paid once a month, raising 3 kids and never having enough. And so I carried that into adulthood. And so now, although I lead a church that externally people would say is successful, I do worry a lot around sustainability. A couple of years ago, we went through some major challenges to where, the bottom dropped out. And this was before COVID-19. And we made it through that. We started in 2007, and the next year the economy fell. And it was one of the worst economies of modern day history. So every 2 or 3 years, we have these experiences. Of course, COVID is on a whole different page. So in a sense, there are seasons when I do wonder about sustainability, but God always reminds me that God will provide. But you ask about when did you know that Impact was successful or had that spark? It was pretty much that first Sunday. I was fortunate to be mentored by a lot of different people, but in particular, Reverend Kimbrough. You imagine the Ford family, who, relative is Henry Ford. They don't sit around the table talking about, can they make cars? Henry Ford proved that. They're on a whole nother conversation. They're talking about, how do they make cars fly? And so I had that opportunity at Cascade, and it wasn't about, can we reach people? It's about how many people we could reach. And so on that first Sunday, we saw people come from all walks of life. And we knew that if people would come to a local school to worship in an auditorium with wooden seats and AC and heat that doesn't always work well, then we felt that we were doing something that was pretty good.
So you all got started 2005,
2007.
2007, 2007. Now, I know at one time your service was, and I never got a chance to experience your service on Sunday morning. I visited your campus. As a matter of fact, I think my wife and I and our daughter showed up one during the week, and you just happened to be there, and we got a chance to see you. But your service at one time was 1 hour and 10 minutes. So describe, is it still that way? And
It's
then
even shorter now.
and describe what their service looks like. And then describe the theology and scriptural grounding behind what you all were doing.
Yeah. So right now in the COVID era, our worship is probably roughly about 50 minutes, and that's because of the attention span of people watching. But even before that, we would run about 1 hour and 10 or 1 hour and 15 minutes. And so when we started worshiping at the public school, of course, we were under their mandates, and we had certain restrictions. So that led to us having a certain time frame. But also we knew we would eventually grow into a second experience. So it's kind of like building a 2-story house, but you can't afford the second story. And so you build the first level rather of the house, and eventually you build out the second story. So looking at that and realizing, and this isn't to take a jab at any church, most churches can cut 30 minutes out of worship because it's mostly fluff. And so what we did is cut out the fluff early on. And that's not to say anything negative. There's just a lot of repetitiveness to worship. There's start and stop. There's a lack of preparation as it relates to worship flow. And you add 2 or 3 minutes every 10 minutes, that adds up to be about 30 minutes. So we took that out early on. And so like most churches, we have an opening praise and worship set that then goes into a greeting by what we call a worship facilitator. Some people call them liturgists, or whatever the name may be. And in that moment, we have people to greet each other. And now it's a virtual greeting. We will share a few announcements, and then go from there into a time of generosity, as we call it. And before COVID-19, we had 9 ways of giving. Now we have 8 ways, and all of those are digital. But and then we'll probably have another song selection or 2, and then the sermon, and then after that, whatever the form of benediction is. And so that comes out to be about 1 hour and 10 or 1 hour and 15 minutes.
Okay. So how much, I said, and I was saying I have so many questions I want to ask you about the flow of your worship. But I do appreciate you saying you took out a lot of fluff, because it was interesting. St. Mark, we had been trying to cut our services, and we just thought we found it impossible to do it. And that's for a lot of reasons. But when COVID hit and we went online, we found that we could do it. That we took out all the fluff, and the service is right about 1 hour. And but it's intense. It's constantly moving. There's no wasted time. But we still have lots of music. We still have about the same amount of music. My sermons are a little shorter, but the announcements are more focused, but it moves along. And so I'm grateful in that sense for COVID because we've learned a lot about how to lead that service. So Olu, what platform are you all using to broadcast your services?
Yeah, we use live stream for broadcasting and also Facebook Live. And then after worship ends, you can watch on demand on our website. And we also broadcast through YouTube as well. And so we find with each of those, and we collect data from each of those. So when I say there are 4,000 people watching, we can then go back and find out how many people were on Facebook Live, how many people were on live stream, and how many people watched on YouTube, to use that, to study and make certain investment decisions or to change certain things that we need to adjust. And back to your point around change, I think the hard part for churches is that we're able to make those changes successfully due to COVID-19, is that once things return to whatever return may look like for that local church, not changing back and staying consistent, because if it's worked now, it's probably going to work after. So that's going to be the courage a lot of leaders are going to need to use when things return to whatever normal looks like.
Exactly right. Exactly. And thank you for highlighting that. Yolanda, I saw you, Pastor Yolanda, you did your hand go up?
Yeah, I just want to clarify. So you're using an actual platform called Livestream, or are you just streaming directly to each one of those social media sources?
Well, I wish I could say better, but it's above my pay grade, and our team would be better informed, be better able to inform you. But I do know, as it relates to technology that we use to share whatever we're doing, those are the three primary: Facebook Live, YouTube, and live stream, which is an actual company, but I'm sure somebody watching would know a lot better.
Amen. So let's do, we're going to take a bit of a turn, and I want to talk about, I want to plug your mind about leading through a global pandemic, some words of wisdom to leaders about that. I want to talk a little about what's in your heart and mind about the racial unrest that's happening. I want to talk about the tragedies that have happened with Chadwick Boseman, and everyone's grieving the loss of that life, and just what the Lord is saying to you about all of that. And then we'll do our final turn and focus on young adults. But let's ground I want to spend some time and just allow you to ground us in some scripture and word. And so I just want to give you, take whatever time you have just to do that.
Well, thank you. And this is a shameless plug for my new book that is coming out September the 15th, entitled Hope: An Advent Journey. And really, that's the foundation of scripture and philosophy for me, of where we are. It is grounded in the hope of Jesus Christ. And so I look at our racial issues right now a little bit differently than some of my colleagues. And I don't necessarily think their viewpoint or my viewpoint is better or worse, but I look at it from the historic perspective that America was founded as a broken nation as it relates to race and how we view all of its citizens. And so when people talk about going back, there is no going back. If you go back X amount of years, women were still being mistreated. If you go back more years, immigrants were still being mistreated. If you go back, we were enslaved. So my hope is that we don't go back, because there was never a great America for everybody. If America is to be what we believe it is to be, this land of the free and the just for all, that's not in our back, it's in our forward. And so my hope for leaders is that we would find a new way forward and find a way to love everybody. I also think for a lot of well-meaning and loving Christians, this is a very difficult time, because I believe injustice is injustice. And so in particular, for a lot of people who may have had conservative historic viewpoints around love, around marriage, around a lot of different things, are now being challenged, because if you get upset watching a Black man being shot on the street, you also have to be upset for other forms of injustice towards couples who are in love, but maybe of the same gender, of children
Yes,
who
sir.
are,
Preach, son.
you know, of children who are growing up in food deserts. And because you're able to order and have enough food for your family, but knowing that there are kids, a few miles away who develop diabetes and blood pressure issues as young adults because the food they have is not a Whole Foods, but rather a local gas station that feeds them juice and chips. And so injustice is real, and we have to fight just as hard for all forms of injustice. But that is not to take away from what we're seeing, in particular as it relates to police brutality.
So, are there any although just for in your journey and both as a believer yourself, as a man, as a brother, as a friend, as a pastor, as a colleague, are there any any of the Jesus stories? Do any of those stories stand out for you? Have they been paradigmatic for you? In other words, that you've used them over and over again and they've shaped your perspective on life and ministry?
For me, I think about Matthew's gospel, which is written from this kind of bookend approach. In Matthew chapter 1, we name Jesus Emmanuel, meaning God with us. And then in Matthew chapter 28, the last chapter, we hear Jesus saying, "Lo, I'll be with you even unto the end of the world." So for me, the hope is not only is God at the beginning and not only is God at the end, but everything that you face in the middle, God can handle. So that has been shaping for my ministry. It's been shaping for the chaos that we're experiencing in the world, is knowing that as we are journeying through the middle, the same God that started and the same God that ends is still with us.
Yes, yes. As you've been working on your book about Advent, and what if any, and I don't know how much of the book you like to share, but any reflections about the Advent season, about the birth of Christ, and then even about the other major events in the Christian narrative, the crucifixion, resurrection, that you think speak deeply into, and you share some of that already, just in terms of not going back, going forward, and that everything, in whatever we're going through, He's at the beginning, at the end. God can. But specifically about the Advent, the birth, crucifixion, that do you think speak to us now?
Yeah, for me, of course, a lot of things, but the book is primarily based on the Isaiah 9:6. For unto us a child is born. And so I think for me, Advent came early. And, I think about this summer in the life of our church and how, now the death toll is over 180,000 in the United States of America. But a lot of the deaths that we've had have not been COVID related. Since the beginning of this summer, a 23-year-old girl who was murdered, who left behind a child for her parents to raise, a 5-year-old boy whose father and mother still grieve his loss and was with them one day and the next day he was gone. A gentleman in his 60s who was a business owner and left a thriving business for his 3 children, but is no longer here. And I'm sure his kids would rather have him than the businesses. A gentleman who is my same age, 43 years old, who had battled cancer for several years and yet made his transition less than a month ago. And these are just some of the losses that I've seen and experienced. And so for me, Advent had to come early. And so I think a lot of people wait on Advent, they wait on God, but the reality is God is already here. God is here in the midst of COVID-19. God is here in the midst of financial loss. God is here when your 5-year-old son passes away. And that's what the hope of the book is about. It is about claiming and reclaiming your joy right now, claiming and reclaiming your hope right now, and not waiting until, the 4 Sundays of Advent. But another note to take from the book and also life itself is I think a lot of people are already negotiating 2021. And so if you think this is 2020, and a lot of people adopted the year of vision, as their theme. And shortly after the year began, they realized that it would not be a year like they'd ever experienced. And so I think a lot of people are anxious about 2021. And taking a note from Brene Brown, who's professor at University of Houston, in her book Braving the Wilderness, she talks about staying and remaining curious, and that as we stay and remain curious, it means that we have to be able to live into uncertainty. And so 2021 is very uncertain for a lot of people, but my hope is that we can charge into next year with faith, with hope, and curiosity, knowing and believing that God is not only here, but God is also in 2021. And one final note I'll say about that: don't give up on the rest of 2020. Don't cancel this year. Don't call it a year that was a loss. Speak life into this year, because as much as I've talked to people who have lost everything, I've talked to people who have gained everything. But whether you've lost or gained in this year, none of us will ever be the same. And the blessing of that is we'll be stronger, we'll be wiser, and we're what the Bible calls, if anyone be in Christ, they're a new creation, and becoming that which is new and passing away that which is old.
Oh man, you just said so much. And yes, thank you for giving us hope. And I pray that all of y'all, as a matter of fact, comments are coming in with just people being blessed by that, by your words of hope and encouragement. And yes, please do not give up on 2020. As a matter of fact, Olu, I kind of flow in this. I picked this up flowing in this a little with Windsor. But I just want to say that what the Lord has been saying to me is that He told me that this was going to be a tough year, and that it was going to be the year that you needed to buckle your seatbelts and get ready. But that included in that would be some good stuff, so some great stuff as well. And so don't give up on the year as we anticipate. But I love what you said about living into an uncertainty, man, because I think that that's part of getting to your place, coming to self-awareness and coming to a place of self-confidence is when you learn to live into the uncertainty, both in your self-confidence, but also your confidence in God, and knowing that, okay, there are a lot of questions that I cannot answer, but I know the God who I trust, and I know the God who's in me, and I know that I can walk confidently, take the next steps with confidence that I know that He's going to keep His promises to me. So, man, thank you. What a great book. We look forward. So, St. Mark, we look forward to. So, is the book, is it out? Is it available?
Yeah, it comes out September the 15th.
Okay.
MarketSquareBooks.com, my website, olubrown.com, and also on Amazon. But Pastor Johnson, I'll say this, just a little caution about going into next year and getting through the rest of the year. And this is something I've been teaching and training years on, is if you think about our congregations, we call them congregants. But if you think about for-profit corporations, we call them customers. So our congregants and customers, I don't believe are or were upset about the company they support or the church they support not being ready for COVID-19. In Atlanta, we have Fortune 50 companies from Home Depot to Delta to UPS who have probably paid millions of dollars to consultants over the years to develop disaster plans. And none of them ever imagined this.
Wow.
And so the congregant and the customer is not upset that we weren't ready, but they will be upset if we don't change because of it. And so the same way these corporations are changing, what a lot of church leaders don't realize is the same level of responsibility they're holding Home Depot to, they're also holding your local church to. So if you just try to simply get through COVID-19 and go back to business as usual, like companies, you're going to lose a lot of customers because they do expect you to change, because now you have the information and now you know the world is not flat.
Wow. Wow.
Move your feet.
Wow. 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 Thank you for that. Thank you for that. Thank you for that.
And change for each congregation looks different. You know,
Change for
change
each
for St.
congregation is
Mark's
different. Yes.
looks
Yes.
different from change from impact.
Yes. Yes. As a matter of fact, Yolanda will know that when I first said it, I almost wanted to withdraw from it, but now I'm kind of living into it. That it kind of came out that I said one Sunday in the sermon, that that I don't want anybody to die and I don't want anybody to even get sick, but that I didn't want this crisis to leave. God, don't let this crisis end until we have changed, until we've started moving into the change to the change of who you want us to be. And so, and because again, I know with St. Mark we're experiencing some change that really was overdue, that was long needed, but we were resistant to it, as all people are. And so I thank you for that statement. So, and I just want to repeat, so our folks won't be mad at us because we weren't prepared, but they will be upset with us if we don't change. Yes.
Because of it.
Man, that's
And
good stuff.
for church leaders who operate in grace, they're not going to give you that grace. It's going to be a quick judgment. It will be a very quick judgment. It's not going to be, oh, we'll come back next week. No, we've known, and that may be for some churches around protective, gear. For other churches, it may be around technology. For some churches, it may be around hospitality. But the grace that we had before, I don't think we're going to have such a long time of grace. People will quickly hold us accountable, as they do the local retail store that they shop at.
So, and you've already started getting into it because we're talking now about leading the church through in the midst of and through this global pandemic. But I want to come back to leadership. But I'd like for you, because I know that Quante is on here. Yolanda will be a fully ordained pastor not very long from now. Pierre Wilkins, who is a member of our church, is coming through the ministry candidacy process. We have a bunch of folks. And I know there are some people who are listening, whether they're called to ordain ministry or not, but people are struggling with purpose. I was just before this call listening to a speech that somebody's taken Chadwick Boseman's speech at Howard and added music to it, and it's so powerful. And he's talking about purpose and how important that is. But Olu, share with our listeners how you understand purpose and how to embrace that purpose and what they can expect as they live it out and walk it out.
Yeah, it's interesting. We're about to start a new series, and it's going to be we've never done a series this long, but it's going to be 2 months, and it's called Clarity, Confirmation, and Change. And it's really about purpose. And these first 2 weeks, we're going to spend some time talking about what we can do versus what we're called to do, and our default versus our destiny. And so a lot of people are living out what they can
Olu,
do.
restate that. I'm sorry. You gotta. I just need that. I need and Michelle,
default
if you
versus destiny, and can do versus called to do. Yeah. So it's if you look at the end of John's gospel, where Jesus appears before his ascension several times to different followers, but it's in that scene where his disciples, a handful of them, are fishing. And what's interesting, in times of chaos, stress, or COVID-19, typically we don't go towards our destiny, we go towards our default and the things that we've always done. But if you look at the early part of the gospel, Jesus transitioned them from being fishermen in water to being fishermen in the hearts and minds of people. But in this crisis moment, when their leader just died, they're not sure if they're going to die. What do? They go back to what they can do. They go back to fishing. And Jesus says, how's that going? And he says, we hadn't caught anything. And then he says, why don't you try throwing your net on the right side? And so the right side was a metaphor for change and a reminder to them that although you love doing this and although you can do this, you really now have to transition to being disciples to apostles. And so thankfully they had teachable spirits and they were willing to answer not what they could do, but what they were called to do. And the rest of the story is the book of Acts and the epistles and these persons going on to be apostles. So I believe this is a season for people to begin shifting away from what they can do to what they're called to do. And the same happens during chaotic moments. You know, in my life, when stress comes up, there are these default emotions that I go back to. You know, nobody loves me, nobody cares. This will never work. People won't support it. And those are default emotions that we all have. But there's also a destiny that God has called us to. And so, the same way we do things we can do, we also have these default records or default songs that we replay and replay. And so this is an opportunity for a lot of people to make some major shifts.
Preach.
You know, it's about shifting from default living to destiny living, and from what you can do to what God is calling you to do.
That is so powerful. That is so powerful. Nichelle, if you'll put that up, I just want people to see that as well. We've heard it is moving, is not living just by default, but living into our destiny, and not living just by what we can do, but living into what we're called to do.
Yeah.
This two, can do versus called to do, and then default life, living by default rather than living into destiny is the second. So Nichelle's gonna put those up. I want you all to, those listeners, write that down. And if you have any comments or questions, please share those. We want to give you a chance to interact and dialogue with us a little bit. So please don't forget to post your comments, post your ideas, post what's going on, how you're processing, what you're hearing. What a great conversation. So Olu, here we go. And Quante is on, and we want to know. I know church leaders. St. Mark wants to know. We want to. Let's talk about reaching millennials, and I think that they've already identified the next generation. As a matter of fact, one of my daughters is a millennial, and I think the other one is the next generation beneath that. And so, what are churches doing wrong? What are they missing about reaching young adults? How can we do that? What do we need? How do churches need to change? How do they need to think? How do they need to strategize and plan in order to reach millennials and the next generations?
Well, Quante, great to meet you. And I'll start out by saying we don't have any secret sauce to reaching, all millennials and all age groups. And so we too here struggle and work, to reach as many people. I guess statistically, we probably reach more than some churches. But one, we thank God for that. And two, I think there are some philosophies to think about, and I'll just name a few. The first is relevance, or being relevant, and knowing that those age groups can quickly determine if what you're talking about is worth them listening to. And so, are we relevant, or are we speaking in a way, or speaking about things in a way to where people quickly tune us off or tune us out? And that can be any age group. The second is being authentic. And one of the things that has happened from COVID-19 is people are learning, you don't have to have a studio camera to broadcast worship or interviews, but you can use your cell phone. And what people are more concerned about, you being authentic, than the quality or the technology that you're using. And so I believe that's very important. And so being authentic means that we don't show up with our representatives, but we show up with who we really are. And that's the good and the bad of who we are. And being willing to share that openly and talk about it. And so if we're willing to be authentic, then we're also willing not to judge or to pass judgment. And that's about and a part of being authentic. Another is being inclusive. And so in our vision statement is inclusive, this inclusive gathering of people. And so being inclusive means welcoming people from different age backgrounds, ethnicity. It means welcoming people from different academic backgrounds and geography and economic backgrounds. And of course, as well as what does it mean around gender and inclusion around sexuality. You know, you got to think my daughter is my oldest. She's 15. And so I think about her grandmother. So her grandmother grew up in a world to where there was no reality of a black president, and graduated from a non-integrated high school. But now there are kids who grow up, realizing that there is a black president, and so there's just a different worldview. And when the church doesn't accept everybody, it becomes hypocritical, and they can't accept that because that is just not the world. And then the final, I think, about reaching certain age groups is service. So often we say, young people don't want to serve, but they do. I just think they don't want to serve the way we want them to be. They're not going to sign up to be an usher always. They're not going to sign up for Sunday school always, but they will serve in different projects. You go to these Habitat bills, and these corporations have tons of young people who work for a corporation, but yet on Saturday morning they're building, is because they want to be involved in service. So I think if churches can give great service opportunities to their young people, if they can be inclusive, if they can be relevant and authentic, then they will be able to draw more young people, and not only young people, but every age group of individual.
Awesome. Quante, I want to give you a moment to jump in. You have any a question or two you'd like to ask Pastor Olu Brown?
Yeah, so I agree about everything that you said about the authenticity, about service. I think that that's really key and that's really important. And for you guys, when it comes to your experience or your Sunday services, how do you include people and how do you include, youth into something that doesn't feel like church but serves the purpose of church? How do we have church without it looking like church?
Yeah, and there are different philosophies on this. There are some people
Great question,
believe
by the way.
that church should be 100% integrated with all age groups, but I tend to believe that various age groups, especially younger adults and youth and children, probably benefit a little bit more from having their own contextual experiences. And so that is the way we answer the question that you just raised, is giving certain age groups their own contextual experience so that they can help design it and that they can help lead it. I find when you have all age groups together, typically there's going to be a dominant perspective, a dominant theology, a dominant way of doing worship, which is going to leave one or two groups disenfranchised. So the only way to give people what they most like or what most represents them is their own space. But if a church is not able to do that or willing to do that, then you've got to use the experience as a canvas to paint on, and make sure that you're painting with as many colors as possible. And so that might mean a young adult or a youth actually leading parts of worship that typically would go to adults, and making sure there are gender balances. So there are men and there are women. There are older adults, there are young adults. There are examples and reflections of what people can identify with. Because if they can't identify with themselves in worship, then typically they won't be engaged.
That was awesome. You saw the person who said yes
Oh,
is a lady who leads our children's ministry. So you're doing, if you're doing 8, 10, and 12.
Yes.
So so for each one of those services, there's a separate worship for children.
So pre-COVID, we at 10 o'clock and 12. Well, let me say that. So on Sunday morning pre-COVID, we technically had 6 to 7 worship experiences in a given day. So if you multiply each of these by 3, it gets to be even more, but 7 that we needed to manage. So you've got the 3 experiences that adults are going to. You've got the 3 experiences that our toddler age would have. You've got the 3 experience that are elementary age would have. And then you've got 2 experiences that your middle school students and high school students would have. So quite a bit happening on one campus at the same time, but each of them having their own programming and each of them having their own facilitator or teacher. I will say one of the challenges that we've run into historically that speaks back to your question around racial justice and equality is that the curriculum that we've been using, we're at a point now to where it's really time for us to begin writing our own curriculum. Historically, as it relates to Sunday school products that you could use for small groups, I've only known of one company in the country that produces Afrocentric type of curriculum. And one of the things that I hear from people who design for us quite a bit is that when we want to show certain images or depictions, there are just some images that don't exist in the media space of a Black Jesus or of an ethnocentric Jesus. And so what we've decided as a church is we're going to stop asking, where is it? And getting an answer that it doesn't exist. And we're going to start developing our own because we want kids to begin seeing images of themselves in the biblical text. And if you study the biblical text, it's very hard to believe that much of the Bible that happened around the equator, that most of those people had blonde hair and blue eyes and light colored skin. It's just impossible biologically.
Awesome. So, so then in terms of the break off for youth, for children, small children, youth, what about your, say, is it one worship experience for, say, somebody who's 25 and then your older adults? Are they in one service?
Well, at this point, and once again, for people just jumping on, this is pre-COVID-19. At this point, we don't have a young adults experience, and hope in the future we will. But all of the other experiences, and this is another philosophical difference, because when I was at Cascade, everybody would be integrated together, and they didn't do a children's time where everyone would stay in, but they would take the children out midway through worship, and then they would have their own experience. And it's not right or wrong, but in our practice from the very beginning, when you walk onto the campus, whatever age group ministry that you're going to, you immediately go to it, and then you have a full experience. So our children have a full worship experience that goes from the beginning to the end, that is designed just for them.
Awesome. Awesome. So, Quante, well, and I've told Quante this, we have another young lady, Christine Robinson, who's doing some stuff with, they're the 2 of them. And we want to send them out to Impact and let them have experience Impact and see see it in person. So we look forward to making that happen. So although it's 7:52 and we're close to the 8 o'clock mark, so I would just want to leave some space and time. Again, I want to say to our listening audience, if you have some questions for Pastor Brown, we can take 1 or 2 questions if you have those, if you send those in quickly. But I want to give him some time to give some closing comments, reflections, just about whatever in terms of the church, in terms of what's going on in our communities and in our nation across the globe, preparing for what I consider to be the most important election in our lifetime up to this point, and all that. Any final reflections for us from your heart?
Well, several rapid fire. One, thank you for this opportunity to be able to share on your program, and congratulations in your journey there at St. Mark, and to the wonderful team. And you're right, this election is very vital. So encouraging people to register to vote, and also encouraging people to vote. We're working with our county to be a voting site for this upcoming election in November. And so every church, and I know St. Mark is very socially conscious, my hope and prayer is that all churches are doing everything they can around voter awareness and what it means to be a citizen who activates their right in this democracy. I also believe, as it relates to the isms that we're facing, these are historic. But we are so grateful for our ancestors who fought, bled, and died before us to give us an opportunity to continue to fight. And they never gave us the false notion that it would be easy, but they always reminded us that it would be possible. So for those who are discouraged, don't become weary in well doing. No, we have come further than we can ever imagine, and we owe that to our ancestors. But the fight is still in front of us, and we have to do what we can. So for some people, that means going and protesting at the front lines. For some people, that means helping to write and craft legislation. For other people, it means going to a prayer closet and praying for people who are on the front lines. For some, that means bringing police officers and the communities they serve together and having a deep conversation around what it means to protect and to serve. And so all of these are a part of protest. All of these are a part of doing our part as citizens. And I want to encourage you to continue to do that. But then one final note I would leave is for leaders who are in the local church, whether you're lay or clergy, this is the best time to be in ministry, because if there was ever a time that people needed hope, if there was ever a time that people needed to know about grace, it's now. And so as difficult as the moment is, it is also creating another moment of opportunity to share the good news of Jesus Christ. And so whatever you need to do in your local church, I've been talking to our church about what it means to streamline, what it means to do simple ministry, and then what it means to, innovate. And so I believe the ministries that will be most effective in this present age, as much as I love big box stores like Target and Walmart, I don't think those will be the most successful, but it's going to be boutique ministries who are very clear on their community. They're very clear on their calling. They're very clear on the resources they have. And they're very clear on what God has called them to do. And that may not be 20 things. It may be 3 things very well, but do that to the glory of God. And I think we're going to see great success in reaching people for Jesus Christ.
Although you're such a clear thinker and such a visionary for the church, and such a strong commitment to the kingdom and kingdom principles, and the way you lead out of that and the way you lead others and build your leadership team is just so fun to watch. And so we know greater things are coming. Thank you so much for coming on with us tonight. Pastor Yolanda, you have any final comments or questions before we leave?
I just appreciate that what you offered seemed very practical and very easy to apply. Sometimes we make things hard when they can really be simple. And I think the church has to get back to the basics, adding back on what Pastor Johnson keeps telling us, that we are reinventing, reintroducing Jesus. I think that we need to rethink the way that we actually do church. So doing church differently is very important. Just trying to get people into that thought process and breaking that social norm of this is how we do things is part of the issue. But COVID just broke that right on up for all of us, didn't it?
Yeah, major game changer. And it also became, I have a good friend who's a Baptist preacher, and he was saying how his leaders before COVID-19 were kind of holding on to certain decisions. And now during COVID-19, they're saying, Pastor, whatever you need. So don't waste this opportunity to make some significant change. After this is over with, a lot of those leaders are going to start acting like they used to act. So use this to make some changes.
Yes, and Pastor Yolanda, if you will helping me with this, I am trying. There's a scripture that's been, and I know the scripture has been kind of a theme for me as we've lived through this, and I want to share it as we close. And it's the scripture that we preached on it about. You will shine as stars in the sky, stars in the night, and I thought it was Colossians. So if you can maybe do a word search on that for me. So I just want to encourage our audience again. You have had a chance to engage with and listen to one of the brilliant young pastors in our country, and doing an outstanding job at Impact Church. If you're ever in Atlanta, make sure you visit Impact Church. Just go check it out and see what they're doing. We have one of our good members of St. Mark who now lives in Atlanta, Dr. Hubert Brown, with his sons taking care of his grandchildren. So I don't know if Dr. Brown is on, but I've encouraged him to go check out Impact. My daughter is a student at Spelman. Of course, she's home now, but hopefully she'll be back either in the spring, although they're saying they won't welcome them back until next summer. But she got a chance to visit and join and connect with Impact. So thank you all for listening in. If you want to make a contribution to St. Mark, Nichelle's going to put up your Cash App. Pastor, I forgot to get your Cash App, but can you give it to us real quick? Just give us your personal Cash App so that if you want to send a gift to Pastor Olu Brown, we want to give you an opportunity to do that.
Well, I'll give the church's website, and of course, we would welcome any support. And you can go to impactdcd.org, which stands for impactdoingchurchdifferently.org. And you'll see from our website opportunities to share generosity.
Okay.
Thank you.
So I'll put that up. That's okay. Nichelle put it up. I'm sorry, Nichelle. You got this. You got this. She's constantly telling me, Pastor, would you stay out of the way, please? But Olu, thank you so much. Pastor, did you find that scripture?
I believe you're referring to Isaiah 60.
What does Isaiah 60? It's in Colossians, but read Isaiah 60. What does it say?
I just lost it because I'm going to Colossians now.
Oh gosh. Anyway, we'll put it up later. I want to share with our audience that on next Wednesday night we will have a special guest on with us. We're going to be a little different tonight. We have Pastor Olu Brown on. Next week we will have the jazz trumpeter Brandon Lee on. Brandon Lee is considered one of the greatest jazz trumpeters in the world. He's former leader of the Juilliard Jazz Orchestra, leads his own quintet. They have a jazz quintet. They have a new album that's coming out, but he is a follower of Jesus Christ, comes from a family deeply rooted in Jesus Christ. I knew his parents. They were musicians at a church where I served. And so Brandon Lee, the great Brandon Lee, we're honored to have him on, and we're going to talk about Jesus, jazz, and social justice. Looking forward to an amazing conversation. It was such a delight to be on with Pastor Olu Brown, our friend. Again, one of the great, brilliant pastors in our country. We're proud to call him United Methodist, that we share the denomination with him. St. Mark, I pray that you were blessed. We're going to end this broadcast, and we will see you, St. Mark. Look for some announcements. You all know that we are allowing some folks to come back into the building this coming Sunday. We're not reopening. We're allowing some folks who want to come in and be there as we broadcast. But we are encouraging you to stay home and stay safe. And so you'll get more information about that. Letters are going out. Stuff will be on our social media. You'll be able to get the information you need to connect. God bless you. God bless you. We love you. And I thank you so much for tuning in. Did you find it, Pastor? No? All right. So maybe we just weren't supposed to do it. Oh, Pastor Olu, thank you so much. A blessing and peace of God be upon you and impacting your family. We love you. Have you talked to Lawrence Young lately? How's Lawrence?
We talk weekly.
Wow. Please be sure to tell him I said hello and that I love him and that he needs to come on my broadcast.
I will. Thank y'all.
All right. Good night, folks. God bless you. Thank you for tuning in tonight.